Extus's story begins at Strixhaven Academy. A student under Shadrick Silverquill, he yearned to be promoted to be an oracle within the academy, but he was passed over for the role. In his ego, he was blindsided, believing that he was the premier mage of Arcavios. In his rage, he found and took control of the Auric, a secret society of mages who used forbidden magic not taught at the academy for quick and easy power. With the Auric under him, he had the army he needed for a full frontal assault on Strixhaven Academy. He has the goal of summoning the Blood Avatar to destroy the academy and claim all of its knowledge as his own. He entered the Biblioplex during his frontal assault on Strixhaven and went to the Hall of Oracles to finally achieve the goal that was denied to him in years past by the Strixhaven Dragons. However, he was confronted by Professor Onyx and Will Kenrith. He defeated them easily using translocation spells, and then found himself at the Shine Shadow Snarl. This was the heart of the Oracle's power well. Here he summoned the Blood Avatar and ultimately met his untimely end at the hands of his own abominable summoned creature. So this handsome fellow right here is Extus Auric Overlord, and he is an amazing Aristocrats commander. The idea to build this deck came from Clavissi, who said, I want to see what you can do with Extus. I just built that deck, and it was a lot more than $15, but I'm impressed that you can get these to be as cheap as they are and still work so well. So let's go ahead and talk about what he is and what he does. So this is a Mardu commander, though you would certainly be... it would be understandable if you missed that. He's got a backside that has red on it. But let's talk about his front side. He's got double strike, which is sometimes relevant, but whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, return any non-legendary creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So there's a couple ways we can take this, actually. There's the spell slinging variant, and then there's the Aristocrats variant. There's probably other ways, but those are the two that came to mind easily for me. I went with Aristocrats because I am a sucker for that archetype, but his backside is also not irrelevant. It says, as an additional cost to cast this spell, you may sacrifice any number of creatures. This spell will cost 2 more for each creature that you sacrifice this way. Each opponent will sacrifice a creature after you cast this sorcery. Then you create a 3/6 black and red avatar creature token that says whenever it attacks, it deals 3 damage to each opponent. Now, note, the red avatar that you create is not actually legendary, and that's important because it's not legendary. If we built up a board of enough tokens, we can actually just circumvent the command tax repeatedly by blowing all of our tokens into this, creating enough red avatars and just swinging them out at our opponent and going, hey, can you guys handle 15 damage right now when you've already taken incremental damage all game? No, I thought not. But then again, that's more of an edge case. Most of the time, we're going to be using this guy's front side primarily. So let's go ahead and talk about what we are going to be doing with him. First of all, we have a very, very robust draw package, 14 cards deep, more than I would normally do in a deck, but there's a reason for it. You'll notice there's a theme amongst most of these cards. Merciless Resolve is our first way of drawing cards. As an additional cost to cast it, sack a creature or a land to draw 2. Nasty End, sack a creature to draw 2. If it's legendary, draw 3. Thrill of Possibilities, discard a card, draw 2. Do you see a theme here? So every single one of these cards that draws us cards, for the most part, has a cost that involves getting rid of a creature to activate its effect. So in normal circumstances, we would try to get rid of tokens or, flubbed creatures. In this deck, what we're going to be doing is just throwing away any creature at all that is low cost, and then just getting it back with the commander to play it again. Whether we end up discarding the card and getting the card back to turn all of these red looting effects into just straight up card advantage, it doesn't matter how we go about it. We're going to gain more advantage off of these cards than we normally would in other decks, because no matter what creature we throw to the graveyard, we're just going to be getting it right back, or getting back a different problematic creature our opponents don't want to deal with anymore. We have Tormenting Voice, discard a card to draw 2, Altar's Reap, sack a creature to draw 2, Honor the God Pharaoh, discard a card to draw 2, and amass 1. This creates a token for us, which is super good for what our deck's going to want to do. Heartwarming Redemption, discard all the cards in your hand, draw that many cards plus 1, and then gain life for every card that's in your hand. Wild Guess, discard a card to draw 2, Cathartic Reunion, discard a card to draw, or discard 2 cards to draw 3, Fanatic Offering and Costly Plunder are both sack a creature to draw 2. Seize the Spoils is another discard a card to draw 2 cards, but it also gives us the ability to create a treasure token. And then we have this card, Change of Fortune. Discard your hand, then draw a card for every card you've discarded this turn. So if we've casted like Wild Guess and Tormenting Voice or a Cathartic Reunion beforehand, Change of Fortune is going to come in here and give us not just a regular old wheel effect, but it's going to just replace itself with extra stuff. And remember, every time we cast one of these, we're getting our creatures back anyway. So we're going to have a bigger hand than normal when we activate Change of Fortune. So we can be in situations where this is going to draw us 10 or 11 or 12 cards, which is very outside the norm for what this is going to do. But it's a very uniquely good thing that our commander gives us access to. The fact that Extus allows us to get new creatures back every single time we do one of these effects is going to do a ton of work for us. Now, we want to get to the point where we can cast our spells, so let's go ahead and start off with our ramping section as our next area. We're going to have a Core Cartographer, ETB, get any land, or get a Plains card from our deck, which means it can also grab typed lands. Letter of Acceptance, it can get 1 mana of any color. We can also sack it to draw a card. Command Sphere, same thing, we can sack it to draw a card. Scampering Surveyor, it can get any basic land from our deck when it ETBs. Marble, Charcoal, and Fire Diamond, because if you have access to 2 mana rocks, always use 2 mana rocks when you can. Honored Heirloom, we have Graveyard Hate attached to a mana rock that can also exile cards from graveyards while also being a omni mana rock. And then Sad Robot, who we have a different printing on him here than I normally would use because this just happens to be the cheapest printing available, and we wanted to get the deck as close to that $15 mark as possible. Sad Robot here, ETB, get a land from your deck. Also, when it dies, draw a card. We get to abuse this card so much. In any deck you can abuse Sad Robot in, I say you abuse Sad Robot. Always, always, always. He deserves it. Now, because we are going for an Aristocrat strategy, though, let's go ahead and talk about the ways we're going to be burning our opponents down. We have a few here. We have 4 ways to burn people down with Aristocrat strategies, and we have 3 ways to burn people down otherwise. So first of all, let's go ahead and take a look at Falconwrath Noble. When it or another creature dies, target opponent loses 1 life and you gain a life. Elos Core, whenever another creature dies, whenever another creature ETBs, you gain a life. Whenever another creature dies, each opponent loses a life. Cruel Celebrant, anytime another creature you control dies, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life. Zulaport Cutthroat, whenever another creature you control dies, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life. So all of these are going to be making, if you've played Aristocrat strategies, the idea is to drop these guys onto the board and then just play your deck in a singleton fashion, and people will die as a consequence of you playing your deck. Then in the other burn section, we have Gixian Puppeteer. Whenever we draw our second card each turn, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. Now, this is important. Remember that almost every one of our draw cards is drawing us at least 2 cards at the same time. This means that the turn we have Gixian Puppeteer on the board, we have our regular draw, and then any kind of incremental draw we do will gain us that life and deal damage to everybody. And then every single time we cast one of our instants and sorceries on our opponent's turns, we're going to gain that burn from the Gixian Puppeteer. And if we happen to kill the Gixian Puppeteer, we can then summon any creature from our graveyard with mana value 3 or less, which is most of the deck, right onto the battlefield. So this card is doing work for us when it's dying, it's doing work for us when it's on the board, and because of our commander, it's gonna be just doing work for us in the grave, because it's gonna come right back and become a problem. Psychosis Crawler, for every single card you draw, each opponent loses a life. He also has power and toughness equal to your hand, so like, if you clear the board out of enough creatures and you get to swing a 10/10 Psychosis Crawler into people, that is one fun way to kill them. Zoth Consumption is another one of our burn cards here. It makes each opponent lose 4 life and you gain 4 life. Normally we wouldn't run something like this because it is a 6 mana card, but it's an MDFC, so it's actually kind of free. It's just in our land slot and we're not really suffering to use it. So there is another thing. There's another MDSC I want to talk about, and it's Ondu Inversion. Destroy all non-land permanents. Now, here's the thing about board wipes in Aristocrats decks. If you have 1, 2, 3 of your Aristocrats cards out, and then you slap one of these onto the board, if you've got enough tokens, you just win the game. Every single card on your board sees that the other cards are dying, so for every creature you have, everybody's burning for 3 life. And if you have the Falcon Wrath Noble out, then for every creature you kill, somebody's burning for that as well. Board wipes can just win the games in Aristocrats without even attacking. And because this one is an MDFC, it's a big board wipe, normally, and it's a land when we don't need to use it as a board wipe, or we just need to ramp up to our commander. We have 2 other board wipes to talk about here. Mythos of Snapdax. Each player chooses an artifact, creature, enchantment, or planeswalker that they control, and then sacrifices the rest. However, if you spend Mardu mana for it, then when you cast the spell, you get to choose everybody's permanents that they lose. You get to be the one that says, yeah, I know you've got Galta on the board, but I think you should keep your Llanowar Elf. He's keeping you comfy. So it's a very, very funny board wipe. You get to keep your strongest things like your commander, and you get to blow up everybody's cards while you keep the most important enchantment. You have the most important artifact. You can tell somebody, hey, you get to keep your mana rock, and but your Bolas' Citadel, it's going away now. Cataclysmic Gear Hulk is in a similar fashion. When it enters the battlefield, each player chooses an artifact, creature, or enchantment, and a planeswalker, and then sacrifices the rest of their non-land cards. Now, here's the thing. Normally, with Cataclysmic Gear Hulk, you want to choose himself as the artifact or as the creature. But in this deck, uniquely, you actually want him to go directly to the graveyard, because then our commander can just fetch him back. We get to repeatedly use this board wipe over and over again without anybody telling us otherwise. But that is not all. Of course, we can't just win the game by board wiping people and drawing cards. We also need to have plenty of ways to remove cards from our opponent's board. Remember, the goal with an Aristocrats deck is to slowly, over time, just rip them apart by playing your deck normally. You don't actually have to do anything to an individual person. Just slapping cards on the table will kill them with time. So let's talk about Dusk Mangler. As an additional cost to play it, sack a creature, discard a card, or pay for life. Usually, you just discard a card that you want to reanimate, or you pay for life. In this deck, we're going to be sacrificing Dusk Mangler to himself so that we can get him back with our commander. When he enters the battlefield, each opponent sacks a creature, discards a card, and loses 4 life. That is a fuck ton of card advantage that we are gaining, and that is a lot of loss of life for our opponents to have to deal with. And we will always come out the positive end of this normally, but we get to abuse this card so much in this deck. So you know what? Make Dusk Mangler ruin people's lives. Angelic Purge, we can sack a permanent to exile an artifact, creature, or enchantment. Remember, we are a budget deck. It is a good idea to have lots of modal removal. Chain Devil, Gravelighter, Plague Crafter, Merciless Executioner, Fleshbag Marauder, and Demon's Disciple are all functionally the same card in this deck. ETB, make everybody sacrifice a creature and or planeswalker. And then they immediately go to the graveyard, where our commander can get them back. Kind of nutty. Rip Apart lets us blow up an artifact or enchantment or deal 3 damage to a creature. Rite of Oblivion lets us exile any non-land permanent, not once, but twice, because it's got flashback. And we have to sack a non-land permanent to make it happen, but like, we're aristocrats. We don't care about sacrificing our own things. Mortify lets us blow up a creature or enchantment. Overseer of the Damned allows us to blow up a creature when it comes onto the battlefield, and then every time a creature that is not a token on our opponent's fields die, the Overseer of the Damned will allow us to make a 2/2 zombie token, so that we'll always have fodder. So if you have Overseer of the Damned on the board and you drop a Plague Crafter, kaboom, everybody loses a creature and you gain 3. Then we have Cathar Commando. Anytime you sack it, you get to blow up an artifact or enchantment. It's also a creature that comes out at instant speed, so I know I keep using the card Bolas' Citadel as my go-to, but think about it this way. I play a lot of Aristocrats decks, and I play with a lot of people who play decks that have black in them. So I see Bolas' Citadel on the board, I'm like, aha, it's on site. I know what I would do with that card, so let's make sure you don't get to do that with that card. So we're just going to blow up cards all the time, but the thing with Aristocrats is you need lots and lots of fodder to make your deck work. So how are we going to be having fodder on the board? It's not just about sacrificing our own creatures with their own abilities. We also need some other cards that we can sacrifice. So let's look at our token generators. This is Totentaz, the Swarm Piper. When it or another non-token creature dies, we get to create a 1/1 black rat creature token. Another non-token creature we control is the important part. So we drop a Fleshbag Marauder on the board, we make a rat, then we sack a rat to another ability, and so on and so forth. Then we have Denethor, the Ruling Steward. We can sack a creature to make each opponent lose a life and gain a life, so he doubles as a sack outlet. But at the beginning of your end step, if a creature died, make a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. That is a very good return on investment. I would prefer to use things like Jadar in most of my decks, but this card is a good substitution for 7 cents. Hidden Stockpile. At the beginning of your end step, if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn, make a 1/1 servo, and it also has a sack outlet attached to it. This card is as good as cards like Jadar, in my opinion. 2 mana, make a thing at the end of your turn, and so long as you're not like a Savra deck that cares about the color of it, then yeah, you made a servo artifact creature token. I'm sure there's all kinds of things you can do with it. You're Aristocrats. Sack it for draw, sack it for burn, sack it for anything. Doesn't matter. It's going to work for you. Moira Scavenger, Death Touch, and Haste. You can tap it to discard a card and then draw a card, so it's a Merfolk Looter for our colors. But importantly, if you discard a creature card, you get to amass Orcs 1. Now, this is super good in this deck because we have a ton of creatures. We have 31 creatures, and we want to throw them into the grave repeatedly to make this deck work. So we're going to toss a creature into the grave with Moira Scavenger, make a creature token the turn we do it, and then get that creature back with our commander. Then we have Open the Graves. Anytime a non-token creature you control dies, make a 2/2 black zombie creature token. And then Ogre Slumlord. Whenever another non-token creature dies on anybody's board, create a 1/1 black rat, and all rats you control have Death Touch. The Ogre Slumlord costs a lot of mana to get online, but he is very powerful while he is out. Now, we are an Aristocrat deck, so we need ways to sacrifice our cards. We have 2 already, not counting our spells that sack creatures to draw cards, but let's talk about our sack outlets. We have Phyrexian Ghoul, sack a creature to give it 2/2. Only thing that matters is this is a costless sack outlet for a penny that is at instant speed. It is beautiful. Transmogrant Altar, we can sack a creature to gain 3 colorless mana, or sack a creature to make a zombie creature token. Whatever we need at the time, we can do it with this. Most of the time we'll be ramping, sometimes we'll be making a token. Vampiric Rites, sack a creature to gain a life and draw a card. Trading Post allows us to discard a card to gain 4 life, or pay a life and make a white goat, or sack a creature and return an artifact from our graveyard to our hand, or sack an artifact to draw a card. So this is a very great Omni card. If we're facing a board wipe and we just want a card draw at the end, then we can do that. If we are facing a board wipe, we want to sack a creature just to get one of those artifacts to our hand so we can get more draw like Command Sphere, then we can do that. But the real reason that we are using this is because being able to create tokens and sack creatures at instant speed is always going to be relevant in an Aristocrats deck. We also have Viscera Seer here, which lets us sacrifice any creature to scry 1. Now, we also want to recur cards. I know that our commander recurs creatures very, very well, but we have a couple ways to recur our instant and sorceries. And specifically, the ways are creatures so that we can recur these with our commander. So the Returned Past Caller says, enter the battlefield, get a spirit, instant, or sorcery from your grave to your hand. And the Revolutionist says, when ETBs, get an instant or sorcery from your graveyard to your hand. But importantly, it also has Madness. So we can use Tormenting Voice, throw this card from our hand into the graveyard, and then pay less than its usual asking price to get it onto the board. And then we get probably that Tormenting Voice back, or, you know, any type of reanimation spell, whatever we happen to have, this will get us there. So the idea is that when we play these creatures, we want to sack them immediately, get them into our graveyard where they're nice and safe, and then get them back from our graveyard with our commander into our hands so that we can keep getting our instants and sorceries back to win the game. Now, what kinds of ways are we going to just shit out a win with this deck? Well, let me introduce you to our reanimation package, but we're going to start with the big boy. This is the Lich Knight's Conquest. Sack any number of artifacts, enchantments, and or tokens. Return that many creature cards from your graveyard to your battlefield. If somebody hasn't Bajuka bogged us, by the time we get to turn 6 or 7, we're going to have a pretty healthy graveyard. So we're just going to play this. wipe a bunch of our like 1/1 rats off of the board, and then we're gonna have everything we possibly could want on the board ready to go and screaming for blood. Victimize, also part of our reanimation package. Choose 2 creatures from the graveyard, sack a creature, return both of those creatures to the battlefield tapped. Vat of Rebirth, anytime we sack a creature, put a counter on it. We can remove 4 counters to reanimate any creature from our graveyard for 3 mana. We sack creatures all the time in an Aristocrats deck, and this is a 1 mana solution to guarantee that you get all your creatures back. Altar of Ball, same type of cost. Pay 3 to tap it. Exile any creature you control to get a creature from your graveyard back onto the battlefield. Importantly, though, the Altar of Ball has the added benefit of exiling a creature, which means we get rid of a token instead of waiting for 4 sacrifices. And I'm not going to lie, I love reanimation. I also love reanimation more when it's repeatable. But that's not all. The entire thing when you're playing an Aristocrats deck is you want to make sure creatures go to the graveyard. And we are playing a budget deck. This is a budget Mardu deck, and so we don't have access to green. It might be hard for us to get our color fixing right, so we've got a couple ways to get our color fixing better. We have land selection here in the form of the Oliphant and the Angel of the Ruins. Now, Oliphant says when it attacks, another creature gets 2/0 and trample, but it says mountain cycling for 1. Most of the time, we're just going to mountain cycle it. Sometimes we're going to revive it from the grave to punch somebody in the schnoz, but 99% of the time, this guy's just going to go to the grave, get us a mountain, and if we're really hurting for more lands, we're going to get him back to our hand with our commander's ability, and then throw him to the grave again to get more mountains. Now, Angel of Ruins can get any planes from our deck, but also he fits really well in the grave. If the Angel of Ruins is in the grave, we reanimate it with one of our reanimation spells, and we can exile up to 2 target artifacts or enchantments from the board. I don't know how many times I have to stress to people. It is so important for your decks to have removal. Removal is how you stop other people from winning the game. So if you can get cards that do exactly what your deck wants and also just happen to have removal stapled to them because somebody at Wizards of the Coast was smoking that day, then by all means, run those cards in your deck. They are basically free cards. They're doing what your deck already wants to do. They just also happen to have some glaring upside. Now, let's go to the land section, and I have a few interesting choices here, and I'm going to have to explain all of them, I think. So first of all, we have the bounce lands in all the color combinations of Mardu: Boros Garrison, Orzhov Basilica, and Rakdos Crenarium. Now, why are we running these? They are come into play tapped lands. They slow down our ramping. Like, these are not great lands. But remember, I told you guys in the beginning of this video, we are running MDFCs, we are running Ondu Inversion, we are running Zoff Consumption. Bounce lands have a very interesting role to play when you are running MDFCs. If you have a bounce land, you can safely throw an MDFC down onto the board early in the game when you desperately need the mana, and then bounce the land to your hand with one of these guys and have access to that spell again. This means that there's several scenarios where you can just go, hey, you don't have to worry about that board wipe in my deck. It came down as a land, and then later on in the game, I'm gonna tap the board wipe for 1 mana, Ondu Inversion's flip side, for 1 mana, and then I'm gonna bounce it to my hand with Boros Garrison, and then I'm gonna spend mana on blowing up everything, because I telegraphed that this was here the whole time. It's y'all's fault for putting everything onto the board. Don't believe me when I say I can't cast the spell anymore. Also, we have fetchable lands: Snowfield, Sinkhole, Smoldering Marsh, and Sacred Peaks. These are here because of the Core Cartographer, and also the plane cycling and mountain cycling abilities can help us grab all of these from our decks. They don't have to just grab basic lands. Then we have lands that will fetch us more stuff, so Evolving Wilds, Promising Vein, Shire Terrace, Terramorphic Expanse, and 3 of the 5 panoramas. All of them allow us to sack them to get new lands onto the battlefield. They are amazing budget options for a couple of reasons. Discounting the Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, every single one of these lands counts as colorless mana without having to come into play tapped. So instead of running like the lands that come into play and gain you a life and then come into play tapped, those lands feel slow and clunky and dirtily. We're going to use things like this because they can be untapped 99% of the time, and when we need them to desperately fetch a land, we were in the situation with the other lands anyway. We were going to play slow with those lands, so why don't we play a land that can let us play slow sometimes and faster the rest of the time? We also have Command Tower and Exotic Orchard as our Omni lands. We also have a bunch of reveal lands, the Foreboding Ruins and the 2 different Snarls, Shine Shadow and Fury Calm, because all of our lands, for the most part, are either typed or they are basics, because we have built the land base in such a way where we've got these guys and then these guys. We've got some bounce lands, we've got some other lands. The Snarls are in a weird spot where the stronger you make your deck, the weaker the Snarls are, until you get all of the typed lands in your deck, and then the Snarls get stronger again, but by that time, you don't need the Snarls. They're very weird lands. I like them in budget builds. I don't run them outside of budget builds, though. And then we have one last land. Very important land for this deck. It's a little land called Cur Keep. We can pay 2 mana and tap it to make an 0/1 red Kobold. We love making tokens and then abusing those tokens for tons of benefit in this deck. So, what is our grand strategy? We're going to be sacrificing tons of creatures so that we can get them back into our hand with our commander, and we're going to be doing incremental damage with these aristocrats on screen here to get people's life down. A lot of our cards say draw extra cards, so we're going to be burning people extra with the Psychosis Crawler and Gixian Puppeteers. We're also going to be keeping an eye out for the time when we need to cast Extus on its backside. It's not going to happen often, but there are going to become times where, say, everybody on the board is sitting at 10 or 15 life, and they've got just a handful of creatures, and you've got your big board state, but you know for one reason or another, you can't get that board state to go in to do its job. Okay, that's fine. Start casting Extus backside by sacking your board state over and over and over again, and you will gain enough tokens and remove enough cards from the opponent's boards that you can just get in and kill them anyway. If everybody's got a blank board, and you've got, what, 3 of these avatars on the board, everybody's taking 12 damage. They're taking 3 from each avatar, and then they're taking 6 or 9 from all the avatars on the board. And not to mention, people are going to be taking a lot of damage when we sack our cards to make the Blood Avatar work anyway. Zulaport, Cutthroat, Cruel Celebrant, like, just the sacrificing to make the Awaken the Blood Avatar come out might be enough to get us in and win the game anyway. There's several instances where this card is just going to close out the game for us in a positive way, especially if people start getting rid of our sack outlets. This is going to be one of our sack outlets they can't really get rid of. But anyway, that was my take on Extus Oriq Overlord. The deck came out to $15.47. 35 cents of that was the commander. So hopefully that fits well within your challenge there, Clivizzy, for building Extus for the $15 challenge. Hopefully you enjoyed that. If you did, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you haven't already. And let me know if you guys enjoy that little story bit in the beginning that I'm doing on these. I'm not super convinced people are going to care too much about them, and they do require a lot more work to do than just slapping the deck together and talking about it. But if you guys enjoy that bit, then hell, I'll do more of them. But let me know what decks you'd like me to do in the future. Hit the like button if you haven't already. Subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, everyone, insert end of video tagline here.
Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability a Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I'd also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here, and they would be Red Joker, Britzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Nabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.